Greetings, you loyal, you astute, you admirable and damnable accursed. David Herle here, Scott Reid over there, and sitting in the guest panelist chair this week, our insightful friend Chris Ball. Yes, that Chris Ball. He of the jaunty, upturned brim baseball cap and curious mind. Welcome back to Chris Politics, Chris. It's been a long time.
I'm very glad to be back.
You may recall Chris has been on the pod a few times before, actually filling in for Scott. But if you're new here, he's a campaign and comm strategist at Earnscliffe, advising senior business and political leaders, including Jack Layton and Andrea Horvath. He's also pretty talented with the cooking and the grilling and the smoking. And he made some sweet-looking 6.5-hour smoked beef ribs in the middle of a raging thunderstorm last Friday. I know this because I drool over his Instagram on a regular basis. Anyway, here's what we're going to talk about this week. Jagmeet Singh and the NDP want Trudeau to stop putting that trip to the dentist off dental care by the end of the year. That's the ultimatum. The latest CPC debate will go over the political calculus that led Herle to be sitting at a table beside Baber and Acheson, where he absolutely did not want to be. Our cursed clipping is Andre Pratt's piece in the National Post on the potential Liberal void in Quebec in the wake of a Trudeau departure. And somewhere around the 55-minute mark, Gordon Pinson's going to drop by to herald our Hey Yous. Chris, Scott, it's the first time the three of us have all been on together. It should be fun.
Fantastic.
Diggity. Chris and I do radio all the time.
What's radio?
Trade recipes.
Who gives a shit?
What's radio? What's radio? That's exactly it. Yeah. No, radio's a changing beast.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, what is your absolute favorite dish to cook?
Oh my God.
To cook.
So I do have a little bit of a soft spot for the beef ribs that I cooked last week. They're just like, it's one of those things that's just like so luxurious, but also just like so just down home Southern cooking thing that like you bite into it and it's just like, oh my God. I'm a big Italian guy too. So I make my own pasta, I make my own thing, and I make this one thing, which is I'm going to go off on a little bit of tirade. What a surprise! So I make a meatball that is made out of braised oxtail.
Yeah, see, you use a lot of ingredients I don't like to eat. This is what scares me about you.
Yeah, because you like an unbraised oxtail, right, David? You're like, when it gets braised, you turn your nose all up.
I don't even know what a fucking oxtail is.
Here.
Lop it the fuck off and just eat it like a man. But yeah, braise it, make it a little meatball, deep fry that thing, put it on some gnocchi. And it's actually a dish called coda della vaccinera, which was when the old butchers in Rome, they didn't get paid because they didn't have a lot of money back in the day. And so they were given all these offcuts. And this is why coda della vaccinera is, I think, the word for butcher, came about as a braised oxtail dish.
Right. Anyway. But are you poor?
Well, poorer than I was about fucking 8 months ago with all the inflation and shit going on.
Oh, sure.
Okay. All right. There we go.
Let's
He's playing the common man. Wait a minute, Dave. You didn't ask me what my favorite dish to prepare. Because it's a dead tie. But
I assumed it was pizza.
Tuna fish casserole and or KD with a can of mushroom soup. Mixed in to give it an extra sort of what I call a thickening agent, but other people say is drywall mud.
That sounds genuinely disgusting.
It's awesome. We used to do that in university to make the box of KD go even further. 49 cents was more than we could afford and still have money for beer, obviously.
I thought growing up in my house, I thought mushroom soup was only to cover pork chops that had been cooked to within an inch of their life.
That's where we got the idea.
Yeah. All right, let's get into it before people leave. You know, we wouldn't want that. Big news in the Toronto Star yesterday. Althea Raj says that Jagmeet Singh, backed up by Anne McGrath, says that the deal with the Liberals is over if there's no dental care program by the end of the year. Since there is going to be no dental care program by the end of the year, as it's August, what's the play here, Chris?
So I think the play here is first, you got to show a bit of strength, right? So I think over the summer, we've seen, so the deal happened and there's this big vacuum and we were kind of not present in driving the bus, right? And then you saw Christopher Freeland show up and do a bit of a Captain Phillips move and say, no, we're the captain now. You're in charge. And so I think a part of this is a bit of a play to kind of reestablish that we are driving part of the bus on this. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, the deal itself has a few different aims, I would say, for the NDP. One is helping people, which is something we really like to do. 2, being able to talk about how we got things done and helped people. And 3, give time to fundraise, recruit good candidates, and be ready for the next campaign in a position of strength. So you can't do any of those things, I don't think, unless you're actually out front on the deal and sort of helping to drive some of the buses. Also, part of the premise of the deal, I think, going into it was you can't trust these Liberals to deliver on anything. So you kind of have to be across them. You kind of have to keep them honest. So again, you're kind of playing to that side of the deal, right? And so I think, you're already seeing, to your point, David, that there is a bit of hedging on Team Liberal around actually getting this done in time. They've started to float this idea of checks as an interim measure, and so I think there's going to be a bit of a political bottleneck that they'll also have to navigate if that is true, right? Because you're going to have part of the left saying, wait a second, this isn't a program. You asked for a program. You're not getting a program. Checks aren't a program. But I think, it'll be hard for New Democrats to then pull away from a deal that was their own deal before anything even gets done. This is as echoes of 2005, which is part of Scott's favorite thing to talk about. But
big time.
But I think I think that if there is some movement, there should be some calculation around how it is framed, the timing. They have to be really buttoned down on what that looks like if it is checks versus a program in the short term, to be able to help navigate some of that sort of political bottleneck that they face down the line. So I like the fact that they're out there and that they're being bold about this, and they're actually pushing the government a bit on this, because otherwise they're going to fall into a vacuum and go, okay, we'll just wait for you guys to get it done. We're going to be politically dead if you keep doing that.
That all makes a lot of sense to me, but it implies that the NDP, that there's less to this threat than meets the eye, and that the NDP are really still quite comfortable with the deal. I have to say, when I looked at it, it did occur to me, polls are showing the Liberals behind and both the leader and the party on a downward trajectory with 100 miles of bad road ahead. I was wondering whether the NDP weren't giving themselves a possible out at the end of this calendar year from being associated with this. Scott, what do you think? Scott, what do you think about that?
I think that that's a possibility. And I don't know that it's quite that specific, even though the deadline they've established is by the end of the year. I wonder if more they're trying to establish the principle that they may withdraw consent for this deal at any time prior to its original end date. And that if not this time, then we're putting everyone, including the Liberals, but also the public, we're putting you all on notice that we may pull the string on this. I'm not positive that economic and political conditions line up in a way that it makes sense for the NDP to want to plunge us into an election right now. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Obviously, there's weakness on the part of the Liberals. I'm not certain that necessarily equates to strength on the part of the NDP in the context of an election. But look, my fundamental take on this specific proposal is that there is some, I wonder if there's some near-term risk that we're not assuming for the NDP, because I think the conditions are changing from what they've been for the past 6 or 7 years. Macroeconomic and macro political circumstances changing the way in which this particular initiative might be received. So first of all, I don't think, like, 3 things. 1, it can't be done. 2, I'll be controversial perhaps in saying that it shouldn't be done. And 3, I don't think it will be done. And so it can't be done because you obviously cannot implement a program that requires federal provincial agreement between now and like in 3 months.
It may not need provincial. They may not do provincial. They're talking about just doing it straight unilaterally federal, but still, it's a program to set up with like dentists and stuff. It's like complicated.
Absolutely. And you're still going to have to move through provincial jurisdiction in order to do it, because you're talking about executing and administering healthcare or a healthcare type service. it's going to encounter a whole ton of provincial headwinds. And so if you were ever to do it, you'd have to purchase your way in and on it. I don't think it should be done because I think right now when we take a look at the stresses that the healthcare system are under and people are starting to place more focus, more governments are putting a louder voice. As you see ERs being shut down in Ontario, you see talking about staffing shortages all across the country, particularly with frontline nurses. I think that people's anxiety, particularly like middle class anxiety about whether the healthcare system is going to be for them, I think it's on the rise. I think you're going to get a continued chorus of the federal government isn't picking up enough of the tab. Provinces will still take the first and heaviest blow, but eventually it's trickling to the feds. I think all that places a lot of pressure on it. And so when you say, well, hang on, now we're going to establish on top of that a new, and I know what we're saying, but effectively a new universal social program that's in the area of health, cuts across the provinces. I'm not certain now is the right time for all of that. We got to deal with both healthcare funding, block financing, and we're going to have to deal with equalization funding. There's a lot there. And then secondly, it won't be done because I don't think that the NDP will pull the deal. So I don't know if we'll end up with checks. I don't know if we'll end up with some other bridging mechanism. But I think the risk for the NDP is they may think that this is more popular than it is, but people might hear it in the context of ER closures and staffing shortages. They may hear it and go, wait a second, I'm worried about putting too much stress in too many places right now. And I don't know that we need to add that brick to the scale.
So, well, I know that Dentacare is a enormously popular idea. Enormously popular idea. This is obviously for many Canadians a real financial stress and source of anxiety, and frankly, vastly more popular than childcare. Like this reaches a lot of people.
It's more. It hits every single household. Right.
Right. So, I mean, I think it's a hell of a popular wicket for the NDP to be running on, and not something that I would want the Liberals to be appearing to oppose.
You don't think there's any vulnerability now on the idea in a shifting context where people say, God, I'm looking at the stresses of the healthcare system. Let's take care of what we've got before we add to it?
I think they're also looking at the stresses of their pocketbook, and I think they're looking at their stresses of their day-to-day lives, and they're saying, if you can take thousands of dollars of burden off of me and help my kid get healthy mouth, like, yeah, I'm going to do that on top of everything else. Right. And so like we're meeting like a bunch of different challenges at once. And so government needs to step up and meet a bunch of different challenges at once.
I think you're falling into a trap, Chris. I think you're falling into the old Liberal and NDP trap there, where we think a programmatic remedy to a pocketbook problem is sufficient. And I don't think that's the case. I think when people don't believe they'll get dental care, they don't believe the relief will be there, they don't buy any of that. They just say that's government speak and bullshit. I'll still end up having to cover all those costs probably, plus all the other burdens. I think you got to be very careful about imagining people receive this as a pocketbook relief measure.
I don't know, but I mean, I think at the end of the day, when it has been framed, both pharmacare and dental care and these things as pocketbook issues, as David said, and poll after poll after poll, people say, yes, I want that because it's going to help me and my family. It's going to help my pocketbook, right? And so it's also going to help your just overall health, right? And so I think at the end of the day, yes, there are stresses on the healthcare system. And I think part of the other trap, though, is the NDP thinking about the deal as the only deal in town, right? And the only thing that's happening, right? And so I think part of where the NDP also needs to play is the newfound leverage or whatever it may be that they have within this parliament. They need to start leveraging that for some of those other pieces, for some of those affordability pieces. They need to be a little bit more ground level and bringing those things back to Ottawa and saying, hey, we're supposed to be working together and we're supposed to be getting things done for people. There's a bunch of concerns out there. And
come on, the NDP are even more lost than the Liberals on the affordability matter. I mean, just nowhere on the public radar screen would people think that either of those parties are fighting to make life more affordable for them right now. So Scott, I agree with you. This is not a healthcare initiative. This is something else. It's a social program, whatever, but it doesn't in any way alleviate the pressure that the government and all governments are feeling about the healthcare system right now. So I just think the two things move in tandem. I think that if you were to try to pretend that you'd made a major salvo on healthcare with this and that you didn't have to deal with the provincial transfers or something, then you'd be fucked. But if you, but I don't think people really associate the two.
My God, man, I don't know. Don't you? I worry a little bit like this is a 2015 moment where folks thought that the orthodoxy of balanced budgets still held, and we discovered that they didn't. Could we not be, as a consequence of post-pandemic, inflation, macroeconomic disruption, we might be in the midst of a shifting sand that we don't yet recognize. And I just worry that when governments come forward, and this isn't even an NDP thing, Chris, like I'm really rooting the Liberals, particularly this federal Liberal government, in the same thing. When their answer to all things is programmatic in government, I really worry that we're missing a curveball that's just slicing right over the plate. And I think it's a dangerous time to be on the stump peddling programmatic solutions right now.
So you think the checks might be the best thing?
I do, and I know people will hate that, and I know that there's a valid economic response that says that that's actually the wrong thing to do. But I think trying to find, like, I would literally start to consider whether or not the federal government should say, let's take a page out of Doug Ford's book and do this, and say, let's look at the many ways in which we actually impose burden on people, right? All of the fees that we charge, all of the costs that we add, the service costs that we add, and say, you know what, across the board, we're cutting it by 50%. Do you say passport fees, all of these things? Like literally, and I know passport fees get a laugh because, well, fuck, I'd love to pay for my passport. I can't get it. But like all of those things, student loan costs, all those, just, look at the whole thing and sort of say, well, we'll start there. So the first thing we'll come for are the charges that we apply to you. And we're going to cut those things in half or 75% or whatever makes sense. And like, I really worry that when
the Ford people had a pretty perfect thing, right? With the drivers. I mean, it's not only was it an easy way to get cash back to people, it got cash back to exactly the people they wanted to get cash back to.
For sure.
Drivers.
And I know, so the analogy is limited, but I do think as a response to the anxiety that people feel, rather than sending them checks that might have an inflationary impact, saying, well, we at least are going to withdraw less money from your pocket on all the things. I think that might be a rational first step. Today, Chrystia Freeland is doing an electric vehicle announcement here in the GTA. Again, it's a good thing to be talking about, fine thing to be talking about. But it's another day where they're not talking about trying to diminish the pocketbook pressure on individual families. And I just think, I've said it before, I think they keep showing up to a baseball game with a hockey stick.
Yeah, and so there's a comms challenge there, and then there's an actual like policy and helping people challenge there, right? There's a couple of different things that are happening, and sometimes they're the same thing. I get it, right? Like, so, I mean, the question was, and the statement was, is that the NDP and the Liberals have been completely off base when it comes to affordability because they're not talking about it, right? And at the end of the day, like, I agree with that sentiment, right? The left and progressives, and I'll talk about this later in my Hey You, need to have a coherent, cogent response to the affordability crisis. Otherwise, they are screwed, right? And so, yes, Chrystia Freeland not talking about affordability, but talking about EVs is, a challenge. But at the end of the day, when it comes back to the question of things like dental care and providing actual relief to people in a way that's meaningful and in a way that is actually targeted to fix the problem, like, I think you can frame that as an affordability issue while also providing the solution that's needed, right? Like,
I don't think I do.
Okay.
That's the difference. So we don't. One of us is right. One of us is wrong. I feel like it's this month's childcare response that Chrystia Freeland offers to every question about cost of living, and says, "Well, we're making cost of living easier by moving on childcare." She is moving on childcare. Cost of living will be impacted positively by childcare, but people don't believe it, and I think it will be the same thing with dental.
This government has
but it's also a very small number of people. Come on. It's a very small number of people, and it's not an answer to the general population about affordability.
No, your answer implies that people believe it at the outset, that even those that are affected actually believe it. My point is more fundamental. I don't think they even believe it. I think they're like, you know what? Give me 3 years of savings, and then maybe I'll acknowledge that they existed. As a promise in advance that it will be a remedy to the problem that people feel immediately, I just don't buy it. And I think dental care will be much the same dynamic. People will be like, yeah, you guys will get around to doing that in 15 fucking years. I'll never see a penny, if ever. And in the meantime, I'm getting hosed.
All right, hurly-burlyites, I've got to come clean. I'm no economics guru, although I've been lucky to work with a few of them. But in my life as a researcher, I know powerful numbers when I see them. So today, we're going to dive into the economic story of spectrum policy in Canada. I tell it to you on behalf of our presenting sponsor, TELUS. It's a big story, or rather, it could be a big story, because at the moment, it's all about the economics of missed opportunity. Let me explain, and maybe you want to get out your pencils. According to StatsCan, our wireless industry already contributes $47 billion a year to the Canadian economy. Big number, right? But it won't shock our smart listeners to know that the potential contribution of 5G could be immense. According to an estimate from PwC, $94 billion in additional GDP per year. But it all relies on government policy, and right now, it's money that's being left on the table. Specifically, one estimate by GSMA shows that $30 billion in additional GDP is currently being unrealized because our spectrum policy isn't keeping pace with international best practices. We're way behind in our spectrum auctioning, the 38th country in the world to begin auctioning critical mid-band spectrum for 5G. And at the current rate of progress, until between 2025 and 2027, there will be less spectrum for 5G available here than in 21 out of 24 benchmark countries. Beyond the numbers, it's not like this stuff won't have any impact on how we live our lives. There are massive shifts this technology brings. Automation into manufacturing, supply chain efficiencies, God knows we feel that one, healthcare innovation, and agricultural practices moving from analog to digital. How food is grown and gets to your table more efficiently, which has measurable impact on climate change. I've thrown a lot at you, Hurly-Burleyites, but here's the short story. We need all the spectrum. The sooner, the better. Chris, I want to go in a slightly different direction.
Sure.
You know, close elections when the Liberals are storming to victory, it's a bad outing for the NDP. When the Liberals are in a close race with the Conservatives, it's often a bad outing for the NDP because the strategic vote moves. When the Liberals are getting smoked, is often a good opportunity for the NDP. Right? Are the NDP
Correct.
in any way going to be maneuvering themselves to get into a position to pull the plug on this government and hope that out of the wreckage of a liberal defeat, a stronger NDP emerges?
Yeah, and I think anybody who knows,
even given the risk that Poilievre would be the prime minister at the end of that process.
And there's the rub. I mean, at the end of the day, like the anybody who knows me knows that I'm a little bit maybe on the scrappier side of the New Democrats, and I know I listened to Brother Top's Herle Burley episode the other day around, no more excuses. It's game time. It's time to fucking be in it to win it, right? And so I'm definitely in camp in it to win it. So I think there needs to the timing needs to be correct. I don't know the timings right now, right, to be able to pull the plug, because again, the deal is supposed to do a few things, right? It is supposed to help people, help us talk about how we help people, which then creates a narrative that, hey, the NDP is standing up for us and doing great things for us. And then 3, give us time to raise money, recruit great candidates, and be ready for the next campaign, right? And so there's a couple of internal check marks that you have to meet in order to actually be in that position, right? I do also think that we need to be somewhere in the public discourse in a way that we haven't been for the last little while. Yes, it's the summer, and yes, COVID's been tough, but we need to start talking a lot more around who we are as a party. We need to be a lot stronger on our values around what we stand for and who we stand up for. People need to see that on their TV screens, on their wireless phones, on their cell phones, whatever, on their social media. They're not right now. If you look to what's happening in the United Kingdom as a bit of an interesting model, right? So you're in the midst of a rail strike, and who comes out of it looking like now a bit of a quasi-celebrity? Mick Lynch. Mick Lynch, the head of the rail strike, the rail union in the UK, who has been able to dominate the media discourse in this current strike, push back against the normal neoliberal talking points about, well, aren't strikes bad? And what would happen if a nurse was going to cross your picket line? What would you do? Wouldn't you let them go? And has clearly articulated from a values-based message why the strike matters, that everybody in the UK deserves a raise. They have been through a tough time. Things are unaffordable. It is time for you to get a raise because you deserve it because you work hard. That type of like strong, direct, values-based communication from somebody like Mick has actually changed the public discourse around the rail strike. And it's Britain, and a rail strike makes Britain absolutely fucking mental, right? It's turned it into, no, we're on your side now. So we need to get a little bit more in the weeds on some of those values-based policies, some of those values-based messages that I'm not seeing, right? Like, so I'm seeing, we put the values in the window, but then what's the second part of it? So like, why aren't you out there talking about grocery prices, right? Let's go out there. Let's talk to a whole bunch of people who are feeling pretty anxious in the grocery line, mom who can't buy popsicles for their kid as a treat because it's too bloody expensive right now. Talk to them about what's really happening. Come back to Ottawa and let's talk about how do we get the grocery CEOs in a room to talk about price gouging, right? There's the group in Brampton, the truckers, who are getting completely screwed by their employers because their wages are being stolen by their employers. The whole protest movement that is not the convoy truckers, it's a whole other trucker movement. And these are working class BIPOC folks in Brampton. Like, why aren't we talking to some of these folks to say, I'm here with you. I get your life and I'm here with you, right? And so there needs to be, I think, in order to be able to be in that position that you're talking about, David, to be we need to start defining that narrative a bit more outside of just the deal. The deal is great. The deal hopefully will be able to provide a lot of help for people and provide us those opportunities to reposition all those other things. But you have to do the other part too. You can't just sit there and wait for the deal to materialize. Like, you need to actually be out there telling that story and connecting with people on a values level.
It feels to me, Scott, like Chris and Brian Top are talking to clouds. Singh can't deliver this message. It's evident. He can't do it.
I guess, and I'm puzzled by why he can't do it, to be honest, because
I don't know why, but he can't.
Well, he's appealing, right? I mean, think about it every time we get into an election campaign. The results are not necessarily all that wondrous, but there are stretches during campaigns where you watch the guy and you go, you can feel him connecting with people. You can feel that people want to like him, but it's never sustained.
I loved him when he was on the Herle Burley. I loved him. He's an incredibly charismatic, relatable person.
That's what I mean.
But he doesn't talk about these issues. He's obviously not animated by economic issues.
So it's never sustained and it's never substantive in an economic standpoint. I think there's another interesting, you're talking about how values rooted it is, Chris, which I obviously agree with. And I listened to Brian last week. Both of you are pounding on this drum and it just makes perfect sense. I think there's another interesting observation to be withdrawn from the example you use in the UK. And that's that, they framed the message. They're using, actually, we'll put it this way, start with this point. I think one of the things that's interesting, and again, it sort of turns 30 years of orthodoxy on its head, what we thought the politics of our day is, which is they're actually using labor as a pathway to the middle class, as opposed to freaking out and running away from labor, right? Yeah. So they're saying, look, you know what? This is actually a fight for fairness because we're getting fucked while CEOs are rewarded for squeezing costs and jamming it up our ass, right? They get a higher bonus at the end of the year. Their salary increases because it's tied to equity and share price valuation. But everyone else, consumers, those on the other end of it, and certainly the workers, they get boned, right? So it's a fight for fairness. And that's something where he speaks first on behalf of workers, but then it's a universally resonant message, particularly in these tougher economic times. And he's been able to make that connect. And again, like you talk about what's Singh not doing? What's the federal NDP not doing? And I've been banging on this for a while. Like, I don't understand why they're not fighting more vigorously for that lunch bucket vote. Start with labor and then try to use labor, the cost of living anxiety that people have, the bread and butter economic dialogue that we're all having because you can't escape it these days. and turn that into part of a political coalition. And I guess fundamentally, I don't know if they're rejecting it because they don't see it as the correct political strategy. But when I hear Chris Ball and Brian Topp say it is, seems to me that smart people in the NDP must think that it is. Or if it's just because Singh isn't capable of pulling out that message, I don't know. I'd write it down for him and force him to give it. The fourth time will be better than the first. And by the time he gets to the 20th, maybe it's starting to work. But I don't know why they would let this opportunity pass, because if they don't, the Liberals will surely to Christ at some point, have a light bulb click, and they'll stop talking about how all the programmatic solutions they've done to date are adequate for the challenges coming, and they'll start to pick up this language.
So think about global supply chains as rivers of chaos requiring deft navigation. Producers and shippers nowadays must work around constantly evolving choke points and blockages, which are in turn created by events like COVID, which is still a thing, and foreign factory lockdowns, and wars, and extreme weather. This is a time of disruption. And the invasion of Ukraine magnified it, cutting off one of the world's great agricultural centers. Africa, in particular, is pleading for grain. Our sponsor, CN, is at the bedrock of our supply chain, especially where shipping Canadian grain is concerned. The railway is seeing surging demand for a range of commodities. Its analysts are predicting intense pressure on Canada's entire transportation system in the coming year, and grain will be part of that. After last year's drought, our farmers are expecting a return to normal crop volumes. As I've said here before, CN has spent a great deal of money to ensure its trains and tracks and railroaders will be able to transport this year's grain crop efficiently. As it does every year, CN has produced a detailed grain plan, anticipating crop yields and cargo flows. The idea is to operate at maximum capacity, and key to accomplishing that is something railroaders call corridor balance, ensuring that cargo bound for overseas customers is more or less evenly spread among Canada's ports, east and west, rather than concentrated on one coast, which seems to be a trend. Here's an example. During the 2020-2021 crop year, grain shippers sent about 4 million tons of Canadian grain to Europe and Africa, but used ports in BC rather than East Coast ports. CN's goal is pretty simple: to ship cargo safely and on time. Absent extreme weather events beyond anyone's control, the sort of thing we saw last year, the railway has the capacity to do it. But ports in Thunder Bay, Montreal, and Quebec City are ready and able to handle heavier cargo loads. Put simply, this is a year in which Canada's supply chains would benefit greatly if shipments tipped eastward again. Our clipping today, and we have music for this, our clipping today is from Andre Pratt. It's in the National Post. I'm not going to read a long section of it because we're tight for time this week. But what I'm going to say is that he basically says, if Trudeau were to not run again, that he doesn't see a Liberal replacement that does well in Quebec. And he implies that he doesn't think Poilievre would do well in Quebec. So what his statement is basically that we're likely headed toward a very big bloc vote. Again, and it won't be a separatist vote, it will just be they're the only people on the federal ballot that I want to vote for. Vote. So, this continues to be my preoccupation about the Liberal leadership because it has enormous implications. The Liberals can't form a government without significant numbers of seats in Quebec, and he's basically saying he doesn't see anybody who can win them.
Sure. At the end of the day, I think, part of the article is also just the fact that, is the PM actually taking a bit of a walk in the Costa Rican snow right now, right? And what is that calculus that they're making around should he stay or should he go, right? And so I think that's an important part of the calculus for any decision is the Quebec firewall, right? Around, especially if there is an increased bloc vote, and there will be an increase in some of the Conservative vote, I would say, if there's no other option on the ice, right? And so, I think there are some important calculations that are happening in Team Liberal around, who is next, right? And so then the challenge becomes, okay, so then how do we make sure that the PM is liked again in the province, right? It is 30-32, so I think 32-30 for Liberals versus Bloc, right? So it's not like they're at that much of a deficit, but where does that go if it's not the PM, right? Is it 25, 37. Like, what is it? Right. And so, yeah, I think there is also, if we have the time to be able to do the work and do the recruitment and do whatever, there is a potential dynamic that if Quebec is ready to say adieu to a liberal candidate who isn't Justin, some of the mechanics could still be there for the NDP to pick up seats, which would be nice, but there's more work to be done there. Bit of a rant, I know, but
is there any chance Singh isn't the leader in the next election?
I think he's still a leader at the end of the day. I mean, what's the mechanism at the end of the day, right? Like, if especially,
the NDP don't have a review between now and the election?
I think we might, but I don't see that there's no sort of groundswell that I've picked up yet around.
You guys have that constitutional obligation? Does a leader subject themselves automatically to a leadership review?
During a convention.
You do? Okay.
So the thing, like, this has been brought up a couple times.
Actually, to be precise, didn't you? I don't know if it's still this way, but it used to be, I thought, that there was an actual leadership vote at every convention. It's just that nobody ran against the incumbent. Yeah, but somebody could actually declare themselves at any convention to run for leader.
Yeah, somebody could.
Theoretically,
Don't think it's going to happen.
No, I know.
And also at the end of the day, like, any of the gains that the NDP has made has been after, a lot of hard work and a few campaigns, right? Jack, in his first couple of campaigns, love the man, wasn't great. But, after time and after people saw him on a national stage and after people saw him connecting and doing the work, then there's a little bit of a momentum built around him. So it's just, the ability, though, to seize the moment and recognize the moment beyond just sort of, the regular platitudes of like the conservatives are just fighting each other and, the liberals don't stand up for you. Like, you need to make that real. And there is an opportunity to make that real. When you look beyond like the Tony Suits and things, actually does have a bit of a narrative there, right? Around like, he has faced poverty. He has been in a position where he didn't know whether or not he was going to be housed in the next week or so, right? Like, he has taken care of his family under some pretty crushing economic circumstances. And, whether that's a narrative that ends up becoming core to who he is and the story that he tells to Canadians to connect and say, understand you, and so I understand your values, and I'm going to reflect that back to you, is a strategic decision that the party needs to make and the leader needs to make as to whether or not they can or will execute on that, right? And so I think the potential is there. So I always kind of refer to it as the difference between potential energy and kinetic energy, right? And so a lot of potential energy there. It's just, making sure that you're making the right choices to be able to unlock it. And again, like when we talk about this deal, the deal is one component of that. But the other component of that is working outside of the construct of the deal to define your narrative, define your values, define who you are within this affordability crisis. And in that UK model, it's like, you're getting screwed, I'm standing up for you. So I know we're talking about Trudeau in Quebec, but I kind of took it there. But anyway.
Yeah. I'm interested, just following up on that specific point, I'm interested that that's the first time I've heard that, and it's coming from you, not from Singh. I mean, why doesn't he have a 3-piece plan and a 3-piece message that, goes with the haberdashery? Because that's an intriguing storyline and narrative about him personally that helps me withdraw an impression of who he is and what he might do as a leader, as a prime minister, that I don't know that's been communicated and probably has particular resonance in the current affordability crisis. But look, I want to go back on the Trudeau and Quebec and Pratt's column. I think the Pratt's column is impossible to overstate in its importance. And David, to your credit, you say this all the time, particularly in private. You never open a can of beer for me where you don't say, Quebec, buddy, Quebec. Like, I just think people, we're all Anglos. It's an English-speaking pod. Like, it's all English Canada-centric. But the truth of the matter is, I think there's 2 takeaways from Pratt's column. Like, one, Trudeau must stay for the sake of the Liberals. Like, he must stay. And second, it is all about Quebec. It just fucking is. And people hate it and they bristle about it and then protest parties form and all that stuff. But look, man, the math of Confederation is that it is about Quebec. And you need real strange dynamics in order to succeed electorally without Quebec. Harper found a recipe where that dime landed on its side, but boy, it's really, really, really rare. And so when I look at it, I say to myself, none of the potential Anglo candidates to replace Trudeau will win. I'm not persuaded they'll win in Quebec. And I'm not persuaded that any of the Francophone candidates that would support Trudeau can win with the sweep of Trudeau, even as damaged and diminished as we might think he is after all these years of incumbency. So I just think it's critical that he reoffers. And if Trudeau steps away, I think it's a gigantic problem for them electorally. They must pick a Quebec candidate as the next leader. And I'm not sure that any of them are sufficiently persuasive that they're going to actually be able to lead to victory. And I would add this, God, far be it from me, what a knob I sound like, because Andre Pratt knows more than I'll ever know. But I think it might be worse than Pratt says, because I actually don't think that it all just goes to the bloc.
I think conservative.
I look at Legault, I look at Quebec Solidaire, I look at the affordability issues.
The Quebec Conservative Party.
I look at all of that and I say to myself, there's no guarantee that Poilievre won't be able to, if he moves his message from Vax and Convoy to affordability and bread and butter, I'm not sure that he can't find a political coalition that extends just beyond that sort of 5 to 10 blue suits that Conservatives usually compete for.
Well,
I think he could be more dangerous there.
And another interesting thing about Pratt's column, and this is why I asked about Singh's future, not because I want to be a jerk. I actually like Jagmeet Singh, but it feels to me like if Trudeau were to leave and Poilievre becomes leader of the Conservative Party, that these are two seismic events in Canadian politics that are going to have a lot of coalitions in shift, a lot of voter coalitions in shift, and a lot of loose fish among the electorate, a lot of loose fish. And so if I was the NDP, I'd be thinking, really, this is a window of opportunity that comes along once a decade or so.
And you have to draw a line, right? Like, so at the end of the day, to your point, David, like in this campaign, that is going to be just like free radicals all over the place, right? And so at some point, somebody's going to have to draw a line about, this is what we're about. This is what Canada's about. This is what we believe our country is about. This is what we stand for. These other guys over here don't stand for what we believe in, right? There's the anti-vaxxers. There's the, cancel culture. Like those bedwetters over there aren't Canada, right? And so for me, there's actually an interesting construct down the line, and people scoff at me when I say this, is that if you look at, like, shouldn't it feel in a really polarized campaign where you've got like right-wing populism on the march in Canada, shouldn't it feel really great and really Canadian to vote for a guy who shares your values, who is curious, who is internationally minded, who has a success story as a BIPOC man, becoming a successful lawyer and a leader of a political party? Isn't that the Canada that we all believe that we are, that we should be? Like, isn't that? Well,
I think that description is why you'll be That description is why you'll be competitive in Ottawa Centre. I don't know where that takes you in the rest of the country.
I think there is a bit of in a campaign that ends up turning into that, right? That it turns into there's two competing visions of Canada. Which door do you want, right? There is an opportunity to work back from there, right? I don't think that, sure, is it going to work in every single part of the country? Who knows? But I do think that there is a values-based argument about it should feel good, it should feel Canadian to vote for the NDP. Right, in that sort of construct, but we can't get at that unless we're doing the work about who is the us that we are, and who is the us that we represent, and what do we all share that they don't share.
Interesting. Okay, I want to do a slight diversion now, because there was a sad thing last week that I saw. I saw pictures of the former Premier of Quebec, the former leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada, the former minister of a number of things in the Mulroney government, sitting at a card table with Roman Baber and Scott Aitchison. I didn't know who those people were until a couple of months ago, but I've known who Jean Charest was for a very long time. And it was very sad to see him at that table. And I just thought it'd be fun for us to sort of game out. I mean, he played a game of chicken with Poilievre about this and lost. But is there any way that he could have played this differently? I mean, he needed a third debate. He had to try to force Poilievre into a third debate, but then he was hoisted by his own rhetoric and had to participate when Poilievre didn't. Scott, I mean, how would you have played this from their side?
Well, before I answer that, I just want to underscore how pathetic that site was. And I'm not dunking on Charest. I'm just saying.
I'm dunking on the party. They shouldn't have done that. They should have had podiums and a professional setup. If they were going to say it was a third debate, it had to be a third debate. They fucked him.
Yeah. Jenny issued that statement around the time of the debate when they decided they weren't going to participate. And she just took a chainsaw and started slashing everybody. And people were like, oh my God, that seems so harsh. And she went right at Leoch. She went at the party, also said like, look, you guys put on a gong show last time. And the party then set about not demonstrating that she was wrong and that was unfair, but demonstrated that she was dead fucking right. I mean, if you've ever been at the cast-off table at a wedding, you know that like the last table at the very end where it's only half filled. It's nowhere near anybody that matters in the wedding, right? They won't even sit you next to Cousin Claude who picks his teeth and talks about animal husbandry, right? It looked like, a little bit of like fancy Windsor Castle wainscoting. It looked like they were at the cast-off table at a really shitty wedding. And it's just, it was unbelievably unprofessional, low rent, pathetic. What could Charest have done? Probably nothing, because as you say, he entered into a game of chicken and he got himself into, this was a matter of virtue, that you had to do this, that you ought to be participating in all these debates. And so then he could hardly withdraw when he realized, oh my God, I'm being invited to a barnyard here. But, if you really want to be a punk about it, like if you want to get kind of, if you want to pick up some of the pure, scrappy, I don't give a goddamn tone that the Poilievre campaign itself has adopted, you could have shown up at a Poilievre rally. You could have just said, hey, I'm Jean Charest and I'm here at your event. And I know you want to give your rally here in Saskatoon about how you're not in this stupid debate, but you know what? I'm here. And I'd like to join you on stage. Do you have any problem with me joining you on stage here in front of all these folks who are conservative members? They're out here to see you, Pierre. I'd like to come on stage. I'd like to have a little bit of a mini debate right now. You're going to make some points. How about I make a couple fucking points? Let's throw down, buddy. I mean, I don't know if that would work. Could you actually get in? Like, how would all that unfold? But if you wanted to go pure punk rock, you might have tried that.
The other option is, he didn't have to make debating the virtue. He could have made scrutiny of Poilievre the issue, but for that, he would have had to concede that Poilievre is the likely winner. And then he could have said, listen, do you really want to do this without one more check on him? Like, don't you want to see one more time whether he can stand up to this level of debate and make Poilievre's accountability the issue rather than debating as a virtue? I don't know. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think if that feels right. I mean, at the end of the day, he called for the party, and so he had to kind of go to the party, right? And so, I think him showing up like Sid and Nancy at Poilievre rally just means that he's probably going to meet the same fate as both of them, right? I think he'll get fucking shouted down, like, gatekeeper, get out of my fucking rally. So I don't know if that's the look that he's going for. I think that might have actually been a bit worse than the card table. But yeah, I think at some point he has to give up the conceit that he's actually he isn't the second, possibly the third place challenger right now, and he's got to come from behind and show some grit, some scrap, but focused at Poilievre, right? And not this like, oh, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of issues, like this is great, this is fun, whatever. It's like, this guy is unfit to lead our party because he doesn't represent who we are. Like, he has to really get that knife out to really get any sort of those fence sitters or those folks who are like, fuck it, let's just roll, to think twice, right? And so that was not like the setup. I agree. The card table was like, if there's any other way to make the other guys look like the other guys, like, the party found it. Like, I don't think they could have found a better way to do that. So yeah, and I think maybe he if he had the organizational capacity to hold a rally afterwards, right, and do the like, I just debated with these three other folks, who wasn't there, Pierre, and leaders show up, and everyone goes, boo, Pierre. but I don't know that he actually has the organizational capacity to pull something like that off. Like if you look at his Twitter, you look at his
I have not seen a Charest rally in this campaign.
No, it's just him standing lonely in an airport.
Exactly. Next to the cigarette machine saying, "Here, I met Hank." He's not actually a conservative voter. Yeah, it turns out he's not a Canadian, but we're here in the airport and we said hello to each other.
By the way, where's my bag? I don't know. Where's my bag? Right? Like it's just like it doesn't. I think that there could have been a bunch of different opportunities for him to score points, but I just don't know that he has the actual organizational capacity to pull it off.
Isn't the truth that, I mean, I'm sure there are smarter people in the country than us, but isn't the truth that this discussion demonstrates that there's no way out of the box canyon? Like, this campaign is losing. This campaign has been inadequate, even in the relative context of the race. Charest is crushing. The party wants Pierre Poilievre is crushing. The party wants Pierre Poilievre. So, like, asking what Charest might have done differently almost takes you back to the beginning of saying, maybe not run. Like there's just the
never should have run. And you know,
this.
his heart isn't really in it, in my view, anyway, because I have watched this guy campaign over the years for the leadership against Kim Campbell, for the Progressive Conservative Party when he was leader, in the referendum in 1995. And I know what his campaigning is like when he's really engaged. And, you know, if Poilievre hasn't worked him into the ground, it's a tremendous failure of Charest's social media campaign, because to me, it looks like Poilievre's working 10 times as hard as Jean Charest at this. I don't see any of that underdog, come from behind, fire, passion that scared the shit out of Lucien Bouchard. I don't see that anymore.
It's like he's adopted this, like, oh no, like he wants to be Goldilocks porridge, right? And at the end of the day, like Goldilocks porridge is kind of stodgy, right? So he just doesn't. He's. It's almost like he's adopted this boring suit because the other end of the race is way too hot. So he's like, well, to come home to the, like, oh, it'll be fine. And it's like people are looking for change, and people are looking for somebody who they can say, you're going to be the next prime minister. We've had boring, we've had middling, we've had that before, and they want to see that scrap. So you're right. Like, and he has, like, I saw Charest campaign when I was in high school, and he gave a barn burning speech at the Kitchener Farmers Market. And it was like, even when I was 18, I was like, maybe this guy's cool. Like, and I'm a New Democrat, right? Like, so the guy has some jam, but like, I haven't seen any of it throughout this entire campaign. And that's to the detriment, I think, of conservative voters.
Well, our buddy Ruth Thorkelson and I drove down from Ottawa, both working on the Yes campaign in 1995, or the No side, I should say. Whatever, I can't even remember now which side it was which in that campaign.
You were for Canada. You were for Canada.
I was for Canada, right? I was for keeping the bridges up and all that, right? And
hand-stitched flags with your teeth.
We drove down to watch that, and when he held up that passport, right, he had tens of thousands of people whipped into a froth. And I think, you know, part of it is, you know, you get older, you've been in government. You spend 5 years probably prowling, corner offices and law firms and boardrooms, and so you just don't have the spit anymore.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that happy note, let's invite Gordon Pinsent in.
Kind of like you, Dave.
A little bit like me. You've got me reflecting. You've got me reflecting on myself.
I got like 5 years left, and I'm right there. John.
All right, Gordon. Bring us home.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right, Chris, you want to start us off with a Hey You?
Yeah, I think I alluded to this, I think, earlier in the show. And my Hey You is to the left and progressives, including the NDP in this country. You got to get in on the affordability fight. And this is a challenge to unions, to show some solidarity. It's to the NDP and others. It's time to get in the fight. So there are models, again, to look at. So we talked a bit about Mick Lynch and what was happening with the rail strike. I urge you all to look at Enough is Enough, which is a campaign that just launched like yesterday. And within the first 2 hours, crashed the website. 75,000 Britons signed up for this thing. And it is a clear clarion call from the working people of Britain. They have seized that we are the country we are the people who make this country go. And so we're the ones who are asking for this. And they have 5 clear demands: a real pay rise, slash energy bills, end food poverty, decent homes for all, tax the rich, over and out. Right?
What about defund the police?
Not in the 5 things. So they are using
You're being
this
a
as
prick,
a platform.
David. You're being a centrist liberal prick, and I fucking love it.
Didn't take the bait. So they're using this as a platform to organize, to get messaging out, and to move that, like, I know it's a tired turn now, that Overton window on affordability away from the populist right of, oh, no, we'll just cut your taxes, whatever. It's like, no. The reason why you're not doing so well is you haven't had a fucking raise and you're getting screwed by the rich and powerful, right? And so a bit of solidarity between the union movement, progressives, the left, to try to move that conversation into our frame would be my hey you. Look at enough is enough.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris.
Great.
Scott?
My hey you's to the Prime Minister. I'm sending him a little note in Costa Rica, which I know he won't receive. I hope he doesn't receive, because I hope he's enjoying his vacation with his family, because I think it's well-deserved, and I never resent a vacation for...
This is starting off an awful lot like Poilievre's video on this subject. So
it is, yeah. But people speculate that he's on that beach thinking about 2 things. One, that he may come back and announce that he's going to quit. Or 2, even more dipshit in my opinion, that he may come back and try to call a snap election in the fall, which I think is just like the dumbest take since cold fusion. But look, here's my hey you to the Prime Minister. Come back and have some spring in your step. Come back and forget that you're an incumbent. Come back and make people forget that you're an incumbent. Come back with piss and vinegar, because this next election campaign is too important for you to leave. Quebec is not going to follow the path that we want if you are not there. The Liberal Party will be in dire straits without your leadership in this particular cycle. So come back, perform as a Prime Minister at the top of your ability, which is a high height among politicians when you are firing well, and make certain you set yourself up undeniably for the crash that's going to be the next campaign, a crash of visions, a crash of messages, a crash of values. Come back and do it full. So come back from Costa Rica 100% committed to not just remaining, but to fighting this next campaign, not as an incumbent, but as an insurgent, because you're going to be facing an insurgent, and you've got to be twice as tough and twice as animated as your opponent. So that's what my hey you is this month.
So this is like the reverse walk in the snow. This is like
absolutely
walk in the jungle. If you come back more walk in the jungle.
You betcha. Walk in the
eye of the tiger. Come back with the eye of the tiger.
Exactly. I'm Carl Weathers. I'm begging you, Rock.
And as the long departed or the newly departed Olivia Newton-John once said, we're living in desperate times, so people need to step up.
We are. My hey you quickly goes out to the people of Kansas, and particularly to all of the people who worked in the election in Kansas to defeat the plebiscite that would have brought in restrictive measures against abortion. It was a lonely, optimistic sight on the American horizon that maybe the Republicans at their worst are not representative of the American people. And maybe there is some hope for some reason to emerge from all of this yet. It's only Kansas, but it was kind of inspiring and gave me some hope. To a shout out to everybody that was involved in that. Thanks for listening to our show. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS. I want to thank our sponsor, CN Rail. I want to thank Chris Ball for being here. Great guy, great cook. If he fails in government relations and politics, he can always open up a restaurant, and you guys will be very happy that he's cooking for you. And I want to thank Scott for being here. Thanks, buddy. Good to see you. And I really want to thank Ken Dryden for turning 75 years old. What a great and remarkable man Ken Dryden is. Had his birthday the other day. And boy, I mean, getting to know him, one of the great treats of my life. And he was part of our government. The country's a better place for it. The party was a better place for it. Ken, you're a great man. Thank you, everybody, for listening today or watching, whatever you're doing. And we'll be back next week with more of The Curse of Politics. Till then.